On the 12th of July 1346, Edward III launched one of the largest military invasions of the medieval period. An English army, 15,000 men strong, cut a terrifying path of destruction across northern France. I'm Dan Jones, and I'm following in the footsteps of those Essex dogs, Edward's ordinary soldiers, and the focus of my latest book. I'm retracing the course taken by the English army in one of the most dramatic military campaigns of the Middle Ages. The French were nowhere to be seen. Looting was easy, and the path stretched ahead to even greater riches, Rouen and Paris. At the rate he was going, Edward could be in both in a matter of weeks, and he probably couldn't help imagining himself grabbing the throne from Philippe and installing himself as the rightful King of France. But things were about to change for Edward.
He's got French nipping at his heels this whole time. He's on the run.
He didn't know it, but exactly a month after he stepped into Caen, his men would be exhausted, on the verge of starvation, and here, about to do battle against an army twice their size. In this episode, we'll see how Edward went from almost total victory to staring defeat in the face. Find out how Philippe of France turned the tide, forcing the English king into a race to save himself. And discover how the first great pitched battle of the 100 Years' War unfolded on the field at Crecy. On the 1st of August 1346, Edward III and his huge English army marched into this grand cathedral city of Lisieux. The people here knew better than to resist. They'd heard what the English had done to places like Saint-Va, Saint-Lô and Caen ever since they'd arrived on the Normandy beaches 3 weeks earlier on the 12th of July. But Edward III wasn't just here so his men could plunder. He was here to talk. The Pope sent 2 cardinals to meet with Edward, but the English king was no fool. In 1346, the Pope was based in Avignon, and he was heavily influenced by the French crown. Rather than the neutral men of religion they claimed to be, Edward knew these cardinals were emissaries of Philippe. The cardinals begged him to stop. They told him Philippe would grant him his lands in Gascony and in Ponthieu in the north of France. But accepting those terms would mean Edward recognising Philippe as the rightful King of France. So he refused. The cardinals were ordered away. The campaign would continue. Their march towards Rouen continued at a frightening speed. Their confidence grew with every mile of French countryside burned. Edward started issuing proclamations to his men about Philippe and the French army. Philippe's a coward. The French are cowards. They'd rather see their country burn than face the might of the English army. But when the mighty English army came here to Rouen, they found a rather different reality. Philippe was with his men, safe on the other side of the river, and all the bridges were broken. Failing to get across the river at Rouen, Edward tried at Elbeuf, then Pont de l'Arche, and then Le Vaudreuil, finding to his growing frustration that Philippe had effectively barricaded the English route.
We found all the bridges broken or fortified and defended, so that in no way were we able to cross over.
Now, it's perfectly plausible that he would have seen this as a minor setback in the campaign. He'd seen weeks of unbridled success, and even now, Philippe still didn't engage him in battle. But the task of crossing the Seine was essential, and that minor inconvenience soon grew into something much more serious for Edward and his army.
The lack of a bridge across the Seine might not sound like a big problem, but for Edward's army it had the potential to become a death sentence. By the best reckoning, these 15,000 men had brought enough food to last them about 25 days. Beyond that, they had to live off the land. Of course, this was a chevauchée, so the whole point was that everywhere they went, they stripped crops and beans and peas and cheese and meat and anything else they could eat or drink. But a chevauchée was like a plague of locusts. It took everything, so you could only go forward, you couldn't go back. Now, if Edward's men crossed the river, they could start heading north and west to the coastal ports that faced England. But if they didn't, they were condemned to keep heading south and east, deeper and deeper and deeper into enemy territory.
And as they marched ever onwards into France, the situation just got worse.
On the 9th, the English arrived here at Vernon to find the bridge shattered. And as they moved upriver, it was the same every day. On the 10th, on the 11th, on the 12th. All the while, the French on this bank shadowed them, mocking them for their inability to cross. Edward was starting to get desperate.
Edward maintained his public profile, of course, telling his men of the cowardly Philippe who broke all the bridges so he didn't have to face the English army. But in private, he must have known this was a canny move by the French king.
It's a classic military tactic, the Fabian strategy. Philippe knew his greatest ally was time. The longer he kept Edward in the field, the weaker the English army would become. Their men would start to get hungry and sick. Supply lines would become stretched. It would take them ever longer to escape. Now, by contrast, with each passing day, the French army grew bigger and stronger. So it might not have looked like much, but day by day, the tide was turning in favour of the French.
Edward ordered increasingly desperate raids across the river, sending squads of men in boats to probe French defences on the other side of the Seine.
With every mile the English moved upriver, the more danger they faced. The options didn't look good. They would either starve, or they'd be attacked by an army moving up from the south of France under Philippe's son, or Philippe himself would cross the river at Paris and trap them in a pincer movement. Edward had to get across the river as soon as he possibly could.
After a week of desperate searching, a suitable crossing still hadn't been found. Edward was now just 15 miles from Paris, but thoughts of marching into the city and seizing the throne couldn't have been further from his mind. There were just 3 potential bridges left available. The campaign that had started so incredibly well was on the verge of total defeat.
On the 13th of August, the English arrived here at Poissy. As usual, they found the bridge broken, but its huge stone supports were still in place. Now, Edward had plenty of engineers in his army, and he set them to work, rebuilding the bridge, and fast. It wasn't ideal, but it was the only choice he had.
Satisfied that he had finally pinned Edward down, Philippe moved his army from its shadowing position on the opposite bank of the river and around into Paris. He was ready to spring the jaws of his trap and end Edward's campaign once and for all. But Edward's men set out to repair the bridge.
At the same time that the bridge was being repaired, a large enemy force appeared on the other bank to disrupt the work.
The The engineers got to work, laying huge wooden beams across the stone supports. Seeing what was happening, a French militia gathered on the far side of the river to try and block the path. But a party of English archers and men-at-arms danced across the beams, and after a short but brutal fight, drove the militia away. Behind them, the engineers completed their task, until finally, against all the odds, the English had their crossing of the Seine.
Philippe was unaware of the rapid English progress, and on the same day he issued a challenge to the King of England. He wanted to meet him on the battlefield, at a place called Antony, to the south of Paris. Edward had been extremely bold on his march up the Seine, telling his men he was happy to meet Philippe in battle whenever the French king pleased, that the French were cowards who were avoiding the English at all costs. Now it was time to see if his bite was worse than his bark.
We don't know what Edward's reply was. All we do know is that when the French left Paris and headed to the proposed battlefield at Antony, the English just didn't show up. Instead, under the cover of darkness, on the night of the 16th of August, Edward led his men across the River Seine and bolted north. Theirs was no longer a campaign of conquest or a chevauchée. It was a race for survival.
Philippe was incensed. Not only had Edward slipped through his net, he'd then snubbed the request to do battle. After weeks of being called a coward, this was too much. Philippe marched his army back through Paris to Saint-Denis, where he addressed a furious crowd.
A mixture of terrified Parisians and refugees fleeing the ashes of Normandy took to the streets demanding justice. They wanted Edward brought to battle and the English crushed.
To understand Philippe's next move, I'm meeting Dr. David Fiasson, an expert in the 100 Years' War and the Crecy campaign.
Why is it so important that Edward crosses the Seine?
Pour deux raisons. Tant qu'Édouard III était bloqué de l'autre côté de la Seine, on pouvait espérer le prendre au piège. Et là, il vient d'échapper au premier piège. La deuxième raison, c'est que l'armée anglaise s'approche de Paris et il s'agit d'une humiliation pour le roi de France qui ne peut pas supporter qu'on s'en prenne à la région la plus riche, la Normandie, et à sa capitale, Paris.
Once Edward was moving rapidly from the Seine towards the Somme, what does Philippe do next?
Et il est partagé en fait entre le désir de couper la route aux Anglais et puis l'idée de rester pour attendre des renforts.
Who's in Philippe's army?
D'abord, il y a beaucoup d'étrangers parce que Philippe VI a beaucoup d'alliances et puis il a beaucoup de chevaliers qui viennent de Savoie, du Dauphiné, qui viennent dans son armée. Et puis il y a aussi tous les chevaliers du nord de la France qui n'ont pas été mobilisés à Aiguillon et ça représente beaucoup de monde, probablement entre 15 000 et 20 000 chevaliers.
Philippe's army is bigger. He should be favourite if there's a battle with Edward.
Ce serait vrai au XIIIe siècle, à l'époque où la chevalerie était la reine des champs de bataille et où la chevalerie française était la première d'Europe. Mais depuis le début du XIVe siècle, on s'est aperçu que la chevalerie avait des failles. En particulier, il y a eu une bataille contre les Flamands en 1302 à Courtrai, où des fantassins, pour la première fois, ont terrassé la cavalerie française. C'est exactement ce qui va se passer à Crécy. On va voir que la cavalerie a des limites, cette fois-ci non pas contre des fantassins armés de lances, mais contre des archers.
Saint-Denis is the sacred resting place for the kings of France, and Philippe came here knowing his legitimacy as a king was being tested to its limits.
We can never know for sure, but it seems likely that when Philippe came to this magnificent basilica, he would have prayed that Edward wouldn't get lucky a second time, that the English king would be made to pay for his actions, not only the destruction of Normandy, but for claiming the French crown for himself. But while Philippe was praying here, Edward and his army were hurtling north as fast as they could. They'd already made one lucky escape They didn't want to have to make another. Edward's men might not have understood it, but they were on the run.
Exactly where Edward was heading is not clear. It could well have been to his English army in Flanders, or maybe to Le Courtois, where he had summoned an English fleet. Or perhaps he was heading for Calais. One thing we do know is that he was moving fast.
When they arrived in Normandy, the English army was marching at about 10 miles a day, with regular stops to rest and recover. But after crossing the Seine, that pace had risen to 15 miles a day with no chance to rest. What's more, they knew the French were chasing them, so there was no time to stop to take the best plunder or seize the finest loot. Provisions were running lower and lower. The army was getting weaker every day.
We have lived off the countryside with great difficulty and with much harm to our men.
Philippe might have been behind Edward, but he still had an ace up his sleeve. The geography of France might once again come to his aid. After almost trapping Edward on the left bank of the Seine, he wanted to repeat the trick, this time with the river Somme. He dispatched fast riders north with a simple order: destroy the bridges, don't let the English cross.
Edward must have known there was another river to cross, and he must have known that Philippe would try to repeat his trick of blocking or breaking all the bridges. All ideas of a profitable chevauchée now had to be abandoned. So even as Edward's son, the Black Prince, eyed up the rich city of Beauvais, Edward flatly refused to allow the men to loot. There was simply no time.
For the ordinary men of Edward's army, the profitable early weeks of the campaign were now a distant memory. They were being pushed to their limits, short on food and now short on the loot that made it worth risking their lives coming to France in the first place. Keeping discipline in the ranks would be harder than ever. Edward finally had to put his dogs on a leash.
Despite his order, Edward spotted 20 of his son's men coming out of a rich abbey, their arms full of plunder. He executed them all and left their bodies to hang by the roadside as a warning to any other English soldiers who might be tempted. The threat to his army was growing by the hour. He couldn't afford to allow discipline to break. His crown depended on it.
On the 21st of August, Edward's army, who had been on campaign for almost 6 weeks, arrived at Erennes, between the cities of Amiens and Abbeville. And now, ahead of Edward, stood his next huge hurdle, the River Somme. Cross it, and his route north to safety would be open. Fail, and his army would be slaughtered by Philippe's. I'm catching up with Professor Michael Livingston to find out how this last gasp attempt to escape went.
Looking at, well, it's not a river today, it's a canal. It doesn't look that deep or that wide. I mean, what's the difficulty?
Well, at this point, it wasn't this, obviously, right? You know, this is a nice canal, as you said. It's beautiful, it's picturesque, this is lovely. At that point, this was marshland with a winding river through it, and it's tidal. So it has a great deal of fluctuation as for how deep it's going to be, and you have to be able to navigate all this marshland to even get to the river itself. So from where we're standing, you need to imagine that you've got quite a distance of bad land on either side of this stretch of water that he's somehow got to get across, and he doesn't even know how to do that. He's got to find a good crossing point. You don't want to wade through water. It's a wet gap crossing. That's going to lead to bad things. So you're trying to find a bridge. If you can't find a bridge, find a ford. You don't want to float it. You don't want to walk across it. You're going to lose too many men. You're going to lose supplies. Not good. Unfortunately, a lot of the bridges are connected to towns. That's the reason the bridge is there. And many of those towns are walled. And he's on the run. He doesn't have time to besiege a city. He's got French nipping at his heels this whole time. So as they are getting here, he starts to send out feelers, right? Send out groups of men who are approaching the Somme at different points. Where can we find a weak spot? Some way to push across this. And unfortunately, they're all coming back saying, I can't get across here, I can't get across here, I can't get across here. And he's also realizing at the same time, not only is Philip behind him, Philip's in front of him too.
Just how close were these two armies together? Because there's this story that the French came in and literally ate Edward's dinner.
Literally ate his dinner when the English have to flee in the middle of the night. And yeah, he didn't get a chance to finish his food and Philip comes in and eats his dinner. Did that happen? I kind of doubt it, but it does speak to how close they were. There's just a few miles between the armies at this point. Philip's got to think, I've got him. I finally have run this guy to the ground again, right? I've got him again. And Edward's got to think, I squeezed out of the last trap. How am I going to squeeze out of this one?
Okay, so given that it's going to be such a drama, such a hassle, such a danger to cross the Somme, why not just stand and fight?
Well, it's a good question, right? Why don't you just fight it? Isn't this what this is all about, right? It's all going to culminate in this
And
great
they've been
battle.
talking about fighting, issuing challenges to each other. Why not just fight? Get it on.
Because they don't really want to fight so much as they want to win, right? So, I want to defeat my enemy, but that's the key. I want to defeat them. I don't want to fight and lose. And any battle is a gamble. Any battle can end in disaster through any number of chance events, right? And at this point, it's an unideal situation. He's tired, he's worn down, and this landscape isn't the best for a fight.
Okay, so let's talk about the ordinary guys in the army. They started with 15,000. There are now somewhat fewer than 15,000.
Right.
Men have been lost to disease, lost to engagements like a Caen along the way. But what's the condition of Edward's army at this point?
Tired.
Tired?
Tired. They are exhausted.
I was tired when I got up this morning, but how tired?
They have been pushed to their limits. I mean, if you look at the pace that they have had since they crossed the Seine, they've been going at basically a double pace. And this is at the end of a long campaign at this point. Right. It's not like they just started. So they're tired, they're worn down, they're hungry, they're scared. Of course, they also know, look, in some degree, our income is being hurt because we were getting a lot of money from looting, and we're not doing that now. We're running.
The King of England and his army were in great peril and seriously lacking victuals, so that for 8 days they had but little bread and no wine.
The French were now nipping at Edward's heels, forcing the English king to continue marching north towards the sea, desperate to find a way across the river. On the 23rd, his army moved around Abbeville, still hunting for that elusive crossing point. For Edward and his men, time had all but run out.
So, Michael, Edward's surrounded by Philippe's men. The bridges are not available to him, but he has to get across the Somme. So what does he do?
He finds an informant, supposedly a prisoner that he has taken during the campaign, has local knowledge of the area and knows about a secret ford called the Blanche Tack, which means white stain. It probably is because there's an underlayment of chalk that gives firm footing to have a ford in the first place, right? So you're not crossing on mud. So there is this secret spot where you might be able to get across. Not a lot of men at a time, cannot have been wide. It's a local ford, 20 men maybe, not gonna be a lot.
We can't see the Blanche Tack today, can we?
We can't. We don't know where it is. The canaling, all this work, landscape's too changed.
Okay.
Yeah, but we think it's somewhere right in here. In fact, I can show you on the map. So Abbeville, this is the walled city. That's where the bridge is. He can't cross it, and it's just up the river here. Now the Somme, as it's coming down, is getting wider, it's getting more marshy, it's getting more of a problem to cross. But he's been forced into this direction by the impending doom of Philippe. Probably he finds the crossing, we think, somewhere in this area. This makes the most sense of geography, makes the most sense of the little bit of clues we have. But yeah, it's all been erased at this point.
And How long does he have? What kind of window does he have to get across the Blanchetaque when he moves his men there?
We don't know for sure, but because it's a low tide ford, that usually means you've got an hour or two on either side of low tide. It's a very tight window.
But he's got about 10,000 men, fighting men.
Fighting men, yeah.
And more besides.
And more besides that he's got to get across. Wagons, livestock, he's got a lot to get across there. And unfortunately, he's surrounded by the French. The moment he starts doing this, it's going to get noticed. What he does then is decide, I'm going to try and get there as quietly as I can. So he actually moves camp in the middle of the night.
Right.
He sets everything up like we're still here, leave watchfires going, so that any French who are watching still think he's in camp. And then he sneaks out with his army, sneaky as one can be with 10,000 men, down here and waits so that he's perched. The moment he can cross this, he's going to start crossing it.
There's this incredible change in energy in the campaign, isn't there? You've had the chevauchée where it's fire and burning and noise and terror, and now they're creeping like mice in the night to get down to the Blanchetaque.
Yeah, well, because they have no choice. He doesn't want to be attacked while he's on the move. And once this ford is open, he's got to start pushing across it, because the moment he does, the moment the French know what's happening, they're going to coalesce against him.
So when he gets to the Blanchetaque, it's early light.
It's probably just starting to get light.
Just starting to get light. What do they see? Are there defenders lined up on the opposite bank?
There are at least some people watching, not necessarily because they're watching this ford, but they're watching the entire bank of the Somme to make sure that nothing gets across, right? You don't want anybody escaping, especially not Edward. So they're watching, and as soon as they see the army, you can't hide the army in the brush. You have 10,000 men, wagons, horses, banners, all this stuff. They start sending out the call for reinforcements.
So in that sense, Edward has a head start.
Yes.
He's there at the right time. He starts, let's hypothesize, getting people across the Blanchetaque before there's serious organised resistance on the other side.
Right.
That's good.
That's good.
But it doesn't last that long.
It does not last that long. We're not that far from Abbeville, which is basically French HQ at this point. So the coalescing of the enemy happens very, very fast.
So there's a battle in a river.
Yes.
What do you think the fight actually looked like? We've got this image here from Froissart which shows the battle taking place. You know, we can see knights on horseback fighting in the water.
Fantastic.
Do you think the Blanchetaque looked anything like this?
No, but it's wonderful, right? What I love about this is you have a man who's fallen and is drowning. Yeah, there was probably a lot of that. This is not a good thing to be falling, especially if you're in kit. This shows men fighting on horseback in the water. That's probably not the case. Why, if you were able to fight on the shore, would you go into the water to fight? You don't want to do that. You want to win. So you stay on the highest ground, firmest ground you can, and just start shooting these crossbows. Would have been absolute chaos as all these bolts are hitting into the water, hitting the horses, driving them mad. Of course, the poor men who are trying to get across there. Now, the English are answering as best they can. They've got longbows.
Which has a longer range than a crossbow.
Does have a longer range, so they might be able to bring more to bear in that regard. But once you hit crossbow range, you're in crossbow range. And that last bit had to have been horrific as they tried to establish a beachhead.
It is D-Day in a river. You're
Yes.
trying to put more men than can be mown down by the artillery.
That's right, that's right. And once you get across, it's just hold and get another step, hold, get another step, as men are pushing in behind you. And the more that beachhead starts to spread, the less fire essentially we're getting, right, against those men who are trying to cross behind you. So as the beachhead gets bigger, it becomes more secure, and it gets easier to push more men in. And at a certain point, the French ultimately bolt. They realize we don't have enough men here, right? This wasn't our plan. This is just coming to the fight. We can't hold against the number of men that Edward's getting across. And they rout back to Abbeville. The waters probably ran red, away from this spot. It was absolutely horrible. But they get across.
The crossing of the Somme at the Blanchetaque was one of the most astonishing military achievements in history, a crossing that should have been virtually impossible. And now on the other side of the Somme, there was the hope of a desperately needed resupply.
Edward sent raiders out into nearby villages. The English had had to dump supplies when they crossed the river, and now provisions were running dangerously low. The king's big hope was that the reinforcement fleet he'd ordered weeks ago would be there to meet him at Les Crotoy, at the mouth of the Somme. He sent a welcome party out to meet the reinforcement fleet in the hope that they'd bring back men and food and weapons. But when the welcome party came back, they were empty-handed. The ships were nowhere to be seen. For Edward, this was another grim blow.
The whole army must have felt it was taking one step forward and then 2 steps back. And now it faced the impassable forest of Crecy. Here, King Edward faced 2 choices. Head to the west of the forest and into marshy, boggy land, which would sap energy and allow Philippe to gain even more ground on him. Or go east of the forest, down faster and better maintained roads, but closer to Philippe's fresher forces, who could ambush the English army. Edward rolled the dice. They would head to the east.
On the morning of the 26th of August, Edward and his exhausted men were trying to find a way around the forest of Crecy. Many of them were on their last legs. The crossing of the Seine, the race to the Somme, the miracle at the Blanchetaque, all of these had taken a heavy toll, and now Philippe was too close to be avoided. It wasn't a question of if there was going to be a battle, but where.
For centuries, the location of the battlefield has been locked in stone, just to the north of the village of Crecy. But Michael's work on the battle has thrown up the possibility that traditional history might be totally wrong. I'm going with him to his new site, around 3 miles to the south.
So Edward is effectively in a race with Philippe,
Yeah.
heading north, and he comes to this spot, coming around this giant forest behind us, and he realizes he's lost the race.
He has lost the race. And you point out the forest, which is absolutely spot on, because it's a huge natural obstacle that he can't really go through. He has to come around, which brings him to this point. And yes, it is here that he realizes Philippe has taken faster roads and is now in front of him. And he's got a lot of men, probably 25,000 easily men.
Wow.
Once he gets word that Edward is hunkered in, they immediately begin funneling down their own roads. And they're coming in 2 main contingents at this point. One is Philippe's main force, and they're coming from that direction, from the north, coming down the road that we're essentially standing on. So they're moving in this direction, but simultaneous with that, the other contingent is coming up a road in this direction. And they're all coming to meet here. The fact that they're split up becomes important later.
And what, would the ordinary guys in Edward's army have been able to hear the French coming, see them coming? What would it have looked like if we were standing here, just in the rank and file, so to speak?
You'd see the dust.
You'd see the dust.
You'd see the dust. This is a lot of men kicking up a lot of dust. And you would see, especially from this direction, you'd see the glinting of metal. You would see that sort of reflective, almost snake coming. Like, oh my God, here they come, right? Banners up as soon as they could get in sight. This is who we are. It would have been colorful, it would have been beautiful in its way, aside from all the carnage it was about to cause.
What are its advantages, its disadvantages as a battle site?
Here is relative high ground. I know it's not a mountaintop, but this is high ground, and you'll take any high ground you can get over an enemy. It also has the forest here. That forest pulls in the fields this way. There's another forest over here, much, much smaller, that pulls it in this way. So you have a constriction in the landscape.
Which means that his rear, if you like, is relatively easy to defend.
Relatively tight, as is this direction, right? So he doesn't have to worry about being outflanked. Nobody's going to be fighting him through the forest.
Okay.
So he can simply guard the front of this little funnel, guard the back of it, and he's in a pretty secure location. Probably can get water from the forest. It's a really good spot given what he's got to work with. It also has a windmill on it, which gives him a nice commanding view of the landscape around so that he can help control the situation.
How do you reinforce this area? How do you prepare for a battle on this site?
Well, he does the smart thing. Edward's not an idiot. He's very, very smart. He's taken the best position he can, and he makes it even better. There's a natural fold in the landscape that kind of moves almost in a semicircle out this direction. And he builds atop that a field fortification. Call it a wagonburg.
He had his army enclosed by a wagonburg because he very much worried, expecting a battle, but he was not able to further escape.
What they do is they essentially take their wagons, turn them sideways so the axles are facing upward, and build a wall of it. And they do that across this opening and across that opening.
So it's almost like a makeshift fort.
It's a makeshift fortification. It's a field fortification.
And then you put men along the top?
Yep, they would have men along the top, especially a lot of archers, right? They're the ones who are going to be useful here. So you have a ton of archers around that wagonburg, and he then goes one further and positions men in the forest line in both directions.
Right.
So he's got these wings of archers stretching out. They're going to help funnel and kill anybody who tries to hit the sides and bring everybody into the center, the strongest point of this fortification.
And is there any way in or out of this wagonburg?
He puts one opening in it, more or less dead straight that way.
Right.
He puts a big gap in it, essentially saying, come here, attack me here. Here's how you get to me. And in front of that, he puts his vanguard, dismounted men-at-arms and knights, and all of their kit and array come at us. This is all the banners. The Prince of Wales is standing in that front line with his banners. It's absolute bait. Come and hit me, please.
If we were in the French ranks, what would we see as we approached the English defensive position?
Well, it depends on where you're coming from, but you're going to be able to see this wagonburg. You're going to see that they've done this. And then you're going to see the men kind of on top of the wagonburg, those in front. You could not see these wings of archers. That will become important later on. But one of the other things is that you're going to feel something as you're approaching this spot. And what we know is that there are two different responses. One part of the army is like, it's about time. We've chased them across France. We got them, finally. And another part of the army is like, yes, but is it wise to go fight them right now? Because we've got them cornered. We can starve them out essentially at this point. They're already desperate for food. In fact, we have reports of one high-ranking member of the army, once this field fortification is described to him, says, don't go in, we'll all die.
Really?
Yeah.
We are the losers. It will be impossible to defeat the English without suffering great damage ourselves.
But in the end, the French are governed by their king, Philippe VI, and he decides, we're going to attack.
Maybe. We actually have differing voices on this. It's very frustrating. I don't know who really drove that decision. In the end, Philippe has governance over it, right? But was it his idea to go ahead and attack despite the danger signs? Or was it his generals, everybody saying, no, we've got to do this, and him going along with that to look like he's in charge? Very, very uncertain. We do know what happened.
They attack.
They attacked.
They attack. And where do they attack first?
They attack first, actually, on that side of the line. And it's very interesting what happens there.
Can we go and see it?
We can absolutely go see it. Let's go check it out. Let's go.
After 6 weeks, Edward III's campaign came down to this. A pitched battle between the two kings, between Edward's 10,000 dogs of war and Philippe's 25,000 gleaming knights. Victory would seal Edward's reputation as a masterful lord of war. Defeat could cost him everything. We've now walked around to the right flank of the English forces, where the Battle of Crécy began.
The forest you see behind here, this is that smaller forest that he's got holding this flank, and he's also got archers lining these trees in a big wing out this direction. Over to this side, we have high ground and kind of an escarpment, atop which is the wagonburg. So think about a wooden wall on top of that little hill.
And actually that little hill, now I'm standing here, well, it's almost as tall as me. So that's 6 foot and then some.
And then some, it gets
then
actually
the wagon's
taller,
on top.
yeah. And then you've got the wagonburg. And then down here, there's this depression in the landscape, which you can't hardly see until you walk down here, but all of a sudden, whoa,
Yeah.
I'm down, I can't see the road below. This is a place on the map called the Garden of Genoese.
What's the first thing that the French army does to attack the English?
Well, they send in the Genoese crossbowmen. They send in this mercenary group of crossbowmen right over this rise, right into this, called the Garden of Genoese, where we're standing. And their job is to launch a volley at this wagonburg, soften it up, right? Get all this weakness here, and then here comes the cavalry charge to just overrun them all.
Is it a little strange to send in crossbowmen first?
It's very strange. Normally you would not have these crossbowmen in this position to be even at the front of the lines. They should be further back. But because this army has kind of split in two that's approaching, they've become the front of that part of the army. And they've come into this fight without any of their good gear on. They don't have their armor. They don't have these large pavises, they're called. It's a shield almost the size of a man that you can hunker behind to have protection while you reload. They don't have any of that because they don't think that they're going to get hit. This is a soft target in their mind. They don't expect all this longbow shot to hit them.
So the plan is crossbowmen come in at the barricades here,
Right.
soften them up, off you go, and then in will come the cavalry, smash
Correct.
it to pieces. That
Correct.
sounds like a great plan, doesn't it?
Bloody great pan, except you don't know this is here. From that direction, you don't know there's this depression. You don't know that there's this ridgeline. And of course, you don't know that all these archers are here.
Right.
So when the crossbowmen come in, they sort of go out of view, start shooting their first shot, and are trying to reload now. The ground is wet, they're having trouble loading. And at that point, all the longbowmen stand up and loose.
Every time the Genoese shot a bolt from their crossbow, that bolt would be answered by 3 arrows from their bows, which formed a storm cloud in the sky.
Well, where do you go? You turn and flee in that
You
direction?
run the same way you came,
Okay, well,
right?
no,
Which is great.
That's not so bad.
except
Ah.
what was plan 2? Here come the cavalry. And they can't see this has happened. All they know is the crossbowmen went up, great big cheer of people being hurt, right? All kinds of shouting and screaming like, oh, the English are getting it now, right? And the cavalry comes running up, and what do they run right into? The fleeing Genoese, which then become a morass of people right out here, which is still within range of the longbow.
So you've either been shot by a longbow or trampled by a cavalryman, or maybe both.
Or maybe both. And now the knights are getting it too. Easy target, just a mass chaos of people. And again, nobody down below can see it. Here comes another wave. They are eager, it almost looks like, to die as they come in wave after wave. And the English are just having the time of our lives here.
It was here at Crecy that the longbow gained its fearsome reputation, and its full force was felt by the French. The knights had no reply. As French troops continued to pour forward, the wings of archers shot in more and more deadly arrows. One chronicler said they struck like lightning into their flanks.
So we've come round from the field of the Genoese, where the first slaughter of the battle
Right.
began, but now we're into the main action. So what does this battlefield look like?
Exactly right. We've come around this way, and now the main action is all going to be happening here. The wagonburg opening is right behind you. So this, what we're looking at, is exactly where they want to be hit. They want everybody to stream in here, being shot the entire time, whittled down. Hopefully nobody will get to that vanguard line and they'll die in front of it. It's a beautiful plan, well executed, on a perfect landscape for it. Couldn't be better.
What can I see? What are the French doing out there?
Essentially all hell breaks loose across this front as the French send everybody into this entire line.
It's just a case of everyone go at once.
Everyone hit it. So when this entire line starts attacking and then another wave behind them, it's a bit of a mess. And as each hour goes by, that chaos is only getting worse. And very quickly it's becoming apparent that the French have no command and control. Philippe does not have control of this battlefield, which is the biggest problem he's got.
Is Philippe fighting himself?
Philippe is fighting himself. He has a number of horses actually shot down from underneath him. He's giving it his all, but he's lost command and control. And at that point, you're sunk.
Everywhere the French were like a defeated people. And when the King of France and those in his company saw this, he shouted at them, "Lords, where are you? Do you not see your king fighting against his enemies on the field?"
Now, when the English are lined up defending the gap in the front of the wagonburg, the strategy is to hold firm, right? But it doesn't quite go like that.
What they want to do is hold position because they have a good position here. It's well defended. And, you know, look, if you want to keep running at me and get mowed down, go for it. You don't want to mess this plan up. In the middle of that line is the Black Prince, and we presume he's the one that decides to not hold position and actually charge out to meet the French.
Why?
I don't know. I have to think that they screw this up.
So this is the Black Prince, 16 years old.
16 years old.
I think I've got a fair idea what's going on, is that the Black Prince is 16 and he's never seen a battle before, and he gets the blood rushes to his head.
He gets excited.
Yeah.
I think that's what happens too. He just can't hold his water and bolts out. And the line comes with him, the entire vanguard pushes out, and now this wonderful battle plan is messed up. You can't be firing in here just willy-nilly now. Your men are out there. The Black Prince is out there.
Let the child earn his spurs.
So what happens?
At that point, it is a melee and it is chaos out there. And amazingly, in that chaos, the Black Prince is captured.
Wow, because the normal story is not like that at all. The normal story, he's just in a bit of trouble, maybe his standard falls, but he kind of gets back on his feet and becomes the glorious Black Prince. He's captured.
It's an extraordinary moment, which at this point hangs everything in the balance. If he's taken from this field, it's going to be a literal king's ransom to get him back.
Well, he's got to be rescued though, presumably. Who does that?
All that stuff about the king, let the boy earn his spurs, not true. He actually takes his entire 3rd Division, opens another slot in the wagonburg, and charges out and ends up sweeping across the entirety of this field.
In the fray, so loud was the shouting, so great was the noise and the splintering of lances that it seemed as if 2 mountains had hit each other.
How long does the battle go on for?
This day is only the first day.
Right.
This battle goes until nightfall. Philippe is taken away and he's taken to Le Broye, which is the direction he had come from. He's taken that direction to spend the night. But he had so little command and control over this battlefield that they didn't call for a general retreat. Not that we can tell. So these men continued to fight in pockets here and there.
In the night?
Into the night until nightfall put an end to all the killing.
When the sun rose the next day, the field here was shrouded in fog. But out of the gloom, the bodies of the thousands of men who had fallen began to appear. Some pockets of fresh French troops arrived on the battlefield, but the damage had already been done, and the English swept them away. This hadn't just been a victory for Edward, it had been a massacre.
Through few men and men of no value, that is to say the archers, the flower of the chivalry of France fell.
Finally, after nearly 2 months, the English reached the coast again. For many of the men in the army, it must have been a welcome sight, but the campaign was far from over.
We have now moved towards the sea, but we do not expect to depart the kingdom of France until we have made an end of our war.
On the 4th of September, Edward and his men arrived outside the walls of Calais, having finally received reinforcements of troops and supplies. Crecy had been a sensational victory, but also a hollow one. Winning Calais would give it some purpose. So the English dug in for a siege, and Philippe, his spirit and his forces broken, could only watch as for 11 months they starved the city into submission.
For the ordinary men of Edward's army, well, they became part of the besieging force. Within a year, their numbers had swelled to 50,000. In late July 1347, the Calaisiens were at breaking point. Philippe mustered an army to try and relieve the siege, but he found the English were too well dug in. Philippe withdrew, knowing he was about to lose the city.
On the 3rd of August 1347, Calais surrendered, and this incredible sculpture by Rodin shows the moment that 6 burghers, wealthy leaders of the city, came out to meet Edward with the keys to the city in their hands and nooses around their necks, showing their willingness to be executed to save everyone who was left. Their lives were spared after Edward's queen Philippa intervened, but the city was still taken. The population was removed and English people were brought here instead. Calais remained in English hands for more than 200 years. Finally, Edward had his victory.
Calais provided the English with a permanent foothold in northern France that would allow not only trade in and out of Europe, but crucially would allow the stuff of war to easily flow onto the continent and sustain English armies. It's no stretch to say that the capture of Calais allowed the 100 Years' War to last as long as it did.
Edward's Crecy campaign and his march on Calais are part of what later became known as his Annus Mirabilis, his miraculous year. And at times it really did seem to be miraculous, but perhaps not always in the way Edward might have wanted us to think.
It's been said that history is written by the victors, and Edward III's Crecy campaign could hardly be a better example. The brutal treatment of the people of Normandy, the escape over the Seine, over the Somme, the near starvation of his army, all of this could be reframed because of his victory in battle. The campaign and the Battle of Crécy became an integral part of the founding myth of English nationhood. It's been fascinating crossing northern France in the footsteps of Edward III's army and my imagined Essex dogs, and thinking how history can turn in a moment, in a single hot summer in France, 1346.
So when we think back on this campaign, perhaps we shouldn't be basking in an English triumph, but instead wondering what might have been.
No glory at Crecy, no Ashingore, no Joan of Arc, no 100 Years' War.